This is usually the point in the year where the college basketball season really starts to heat up in terms of like media attention and general attention. College football has been over, but now the Super Bowl matchup is set up. So for the next 2 weeks, you have no football, and then right after that, it's full-fledged to March Madness. Plus, it's the Eagles-Chiefs again. I know people are kind of sick and tired of that, so I feel like they're going to look to watch some hoops this week. Let's get on with the Q&A. Who is the coach of the year right now? I have a short list of about 10 guys who I think deserve some kind of credibility in the race. I'd say Bruce Pearl, Tom Izzo, TJ Otzelberger, and Todd Golden are the 4 coaches from the big, really, really good, like top 10 ranked teams that deserve to be in the conversation. They have done the most impressive coaching jobs. Most of them are because of their team's performance versus expectations, which I think is a huge part of this. That's why I think Dennis Gates at Mizzou should be in the conversation. Jared Calhoun at Utah State. And McCollum at Drake should at least be talked about and mentioned. He won't win the award, but what he's doing coming from the D2 level in the MVC is awesome. I think Rick Pitino ranks really high up there. St. John's is one of the 15 best teams in the country, much in part to the team he's put together and also the coaching system and the physicality they play with because of him. My top 2 guys, and I go back and forth. Mark Pope, Kentucky, has to be on there. Yes, it's Kentucky. He was always going to be able to recruit really easily and well early on, but not just him getting players in on such short notice to be so good in year 1, but schematically the X's and O's that they're playing with has been incredible, and the guys he brought in were the right guys. Like, they fit the system that he wants really well. But if I had to pick a winner, I'd go with their in-state rival, Pat Kelsey at Louisville. Maybe it's unfair to Mark Pope and the rest of the candidates, but when you look at what Louisville has been the last 2 years, for them to win like 5 games in a season and then all of a sudden be a top 20 team in the country is unbelievable. Yes, Pat Kelsey had money to spend, but in the same light, he had to go get guys and go get the right guys and then go get the right guys for the system and make them fit into the system. So right now, coach of the year for me would be Pat Kelsey. St. John's to the Final Four, maybe even a natty. St. John's has Final Four upside. I don't know about a national championship. I think they're really underrated because they don't have like massive high profile wins, especially in the out of conference slate, but their resume is still good, and I genuinely think they're a top 15 team in the country. They win through pure bully ball. It's kind of reminiscent of like classic Big East hoops from like the 90s, and I guess that makes sense when you consider that Rick Pitino is the coach. But they are legitimately one of the worst 3-point shooting teams in the country, but they still win games. They shot 8% from 3 in the win against Xavier, but somehow grinded out a win. Like, that's what they do. Super physical. They own the paint on both ends of the floor. They're shot blocking. They get a ton of offensive rebounds, and they're super physical and a great defensive team. And in terms of the tournament, my worry is the outside shooting. I think that they can dismantle teams and really make it a living hell for teams that can't be as physical as them. But at some point, they're going to have to beat an offensive team and be able to shoot the 3 ball. So national championship is going to be very tough. I don't see that happening, but with the right path, they could get to the Final Four with an improved outside shot. Is Xavier getting hot at the right time? Teams do get hot at the right and wrong time in the season sometimes. NC State last year got hot at the right time in March. Alabama last year got hot about right now in January and February, and it led to them going to the Final Four. But teams also peaked too early. Auburn in 2022 with Jabari Smith as their best player, they were 22-1 on February 5th, but then they went 5-4 the rest of the way. They got a 2 seed instead of 1, and they lost in the round of 32. Teams getting hot now is a good thing. Xavier has looked much better in their last 5 games, and they need that to get into the tournament at all. Maryland, even though they're in the Big Ten and will lose more games, maybe they're starting to pick up steam at the perfect time. Wins at Illinois and Indiana after they've been struggling on the road for years. Their guards are playing really well. Definitely a dangerous team for the Terps. Texas Tech is definitely starting to trend up in the right direction. Would be on a massive winning streak right now if it wasn't for that Iowa State overtime loss. And if they win that game against Iowa State, the number 2 team in the country at home, people would be talking about them much, much more, but instead they lose by 1 in overtime, so they're kind of flying under the radar a little bit right now. Talked about Louisville. They haven't lost since the Kentucky game on December 14th. They've been awesome. People were doubting Houston after they started the season 4-3, but they haven't lost since then, and they're 100% still the usual Houston top 5 to 10 team in the country. Vanderbilt, who have had hot and cold moments, but mostly good, have been trending up, and Creighton also, even with their injuries, have looked great. Speaking of the Terps, do you think Maryland is underrated and is flying under the radar? I don't think they're flying under the radar after this week with the Illinois and Indiana away wins, but I still think they might be a little underrated for March at least. They have 2 really good bigs to create a mismatch problem. They have a go-to lead guard, Jacoby Gillespie, who's been awesome. Their shooting and scoring wings have been playing their best ball of the year. You saw Selton Miguel and Rodney Rice be huge in that Indiana game, obviously especially Rodney Rice down the stretch. They don't turn the ball over. They have a nails defense. They can play faster offense and keep up with teams. But the reason why I think they might be a little underrated is because I think they're better built than some of the better teams in the Big Ten to succeed in the postseason. Always see Big Ten teams teams like Penn State a couple of years ago kind of streak at the right point in postseason play in a tournament format, and I think Maryland could be one of those teams. So maybe they end up being the 4th or 5th seed in the Big Ten tournament, but maybe they win the Big Ten tournament. Maybe they get to a Sweet 16 and Elite 8 where the other Big Ten teams can't or don't. Not saying it's for sure going to happen, but I do think Maryland has an underrated March aspect to them. Very interested to hear your thoughts on Vanderbilt. Obviously a great story with some big wins so far. Where do they fit in seed-wise if they keep this up? I haven't done my bracketology yet, but they're very, very safely in the field after the Tennessee and Kentucky wins. Like, they're going to be a tournament team for sure in year one right now with Mark Byington. And it has been super fun to watch. I don't know what to fully make of them in terms of like their quality and upside. Like I said, they looked really good beating Tennessee at home, but then they kind of looked out of their grasp and wits at Alabama, but then they also looked great beating Kentucky at home. I want to see them shoot a little bit more consistently and perform a little bit on the road before I fully dive in. But Vanderbilt, we're looking at like, I don't know, anywhere in like the 5 to 9 seed range, depending on where the next few weeks play out. What's a team outside of the top 15 or just outside of the public perception of title contenders and you think is equipped to win it all? I honestly think that most of the true national title contenders get a lot of coverage right now. I'd say of all of them, people are doubting Houston, who I think is just as much of a title contender as anybody else right now. And then outside the top 15, not to win a national title, just to succeed in March, I wouldn't put it past Gonzaga to figure it out. They are toying with their rotations right now. I think Maryland and Texas Tech, that I've already mentioned, have the formula and recipe a bit to be a good, successful team in March. But truly to win a national title, I think of all of them, Houston is getting the least amount of attention. Are you worried about Duke's lack of tournament experience with their roster this year? This is definitely a fair concern. 24% of Duke's current minutes were from the roster last year, which would be an all-time low for a national champion if they were to get there and win the national championship. It doesn't worry me a ton, like only a little bit, and really only because they don't have that experience in a true one guard to like completely control the offensive system. A guy like Jeremy Roach, who they obviously had for a couple of years, like he would be perfect for them right now. I'm not going to lie. The experience for them in general isn't ideal. They have a lot of experience in their role players, but their best players, their freshmen obviously, and even their coaching and John Shire, like historically teams with this makeup don't win national titles, but I think this team is also an exception. I think they're unbelievable. Their quality has been incredible. And I think John Shire's experience isn't really fair to judge him as just a head coach because he was being groomed for this position for years. So there's definitely an aspect in the back of my brain about like the young guys and the young team in the tournament, but it's not going to affect me picking them to win the national championship if I want to pick them to win the national title. What do you see as the biggest weakness for each of the top contenders? I like this. Auburn, I honestly don't really know what they're not good at. Like I would have said that they're not good at winning in dogfights, but they just exactly won that against Tennessee. Say because a lot of the guys were there last year, maybe the pressure from last year's tournament game against Yale and flop could be something that they're thinking about this year. They're probably not thinking about it, but I don't know. Like they don't really have many weaknesses at all. Duke's biggest weakness is the lack of a true consistent point guard and definitely their inexperience, especially in their coaching. Iowa State's weakness is in their outside shooting. They're a good outside shooting team, but they can get cold. It was their biggest weakness last year, and it's what led to them losing games and kind of getting cold in these big matchups. Alabama's biggest weakness is probably their defense. They play so fast, and they just go, and rely on offense. And sometimes they can get a little turnover happy, and then they don't lock up on the defensive end, so that could be their downfall. Florida's tough on paper. Everything looks completely sound. I'd say their biggest weakness is probably the ability to control games. They play in some slow games. They play in a lot of fast games, but it feels like the pace gets controlled by the other team, and even though they end up winning a lot of those games. Houston's weakness is definitely their offensive ceiling. I still think their offense is good, but like we saw with Houston last year, even before the Jamal Shead injury, but Houston for the last couple of years, it feels like they just stay close and chase games a little bit sometimes against the other top teams, like we saw in the Kansas game, waiting for mistakes to happen, which does work because they're so good at pouncing on those mistakes. But I think to win a national title like they want to, they have to have a better offensive ceiling. Michigan State, easy answer. Outside shooting, their biggest weakness. Tennessee, an easy one also. It's just their offensive ceiling. They just get so streaky cold in games, and it's going to be the downfall of them in March. Like at some point, they're going to have one of these games that they've been having, and they're going to flop. And Marquette's biggest weakness is probably their depth. They have 5 starters who play like almost 30 minutes a game, and then no one plays more than like 10 or 11 minutes a game after that. You're going to face some kind of injury or foul trouble at some point in the postseason, so those guys better be ready if they're not already, and it kind of worries me a little bit. What do you think the Mark Sears benching was about? Everything I gathered, the shots just weren't falling for Mark in the LSU game on Saturday, and Nate Oates just wanted to go a different way. because Alabama has the luxury of going a different way and benching Mark Sears for a little bit. 99% of teams in the country don't have the guards and general depth that Alabama has of unbelievably talented players to be able to put an All-American on the bench just because he's not playing his best. A lot of people ask me, are you worried about Mark Sears? He was emotional on the bench during the game talking to his coaches, and he was frustrated, and rightfully so. He's Mark Sears. He's been in these big moments. He's proven himself. He wants to play every minute. He wants to play his way out of funks. I get that, and I probably would have let him play it out also. Knowing who Mark Sears is and everything we know about him, I would say, if anything, he uses this as fuel to the fire to not let it happen again, and he goes on a tear the rest of the season. Could Donovan Dent get drafted? 100%. Answer to the question, absolutely, he should get drafted. The season that Donovan Dent is having does not get enough attention and love. He's up to almost 20 points a game and 6 assists per game on arguably the best team in the Mountain West by the time of the season, and New Mexico has been unbelievable this year so far. He took a huge leap from year 1 to year 2 being that primary guy, and then even after last year being so good, he's taken another step this year, and he has no doubt an All-American. Like, I think he has a legit case if New Mexico continues on the path they're going on and maybe wins the Mountain West, or they get a really good seed and they're one of the best teams out of the Mountain West, for him to be second, maybe even first team All-American if things go well. I think he's been that good. Hard to say that there's been a guard or any guards better than him in the entire country. Like, Donovan Dent has been that good. From a draft perspective, I don't know why he's not getting more attention from the media. Maybe he is from the scouts, and scouts are definitely watching their games for sure. But I think Donovan Dent has firmly put himself into late first round conversations right now for the draft. Which mid-major conference bid would you be the most afraid of come March? Personally, I'd be afraid of whoever wins the SoCon. Definitely the SoCon. Samford and Furman are the most premier teams, but ETSU is a good underdog. Wofford, there's a few good teams in there for sure. That league has notoriously produced good teams for March. Gotta watch the Big West. UC Irvine and UC San Diego are actually two of the best mid-majors in the entire country and still don't get enough attention. Then you gotta add the MVC. Bradley and Drake are the two teams I'd bet basically everything I have that it's going to be one of them that ends up winning the tournament and getting into the NCAA tournament with that bid. What makes college basketball so great? Why do we as fans hold it in such high regard over other sports? There's definitely like this bit of like, I'm not going to say a culty vibe, but like college basketball is super close knit and it is super unique to other pro and college sports landscape, so the community stays super tight, and it's kind of like this bubble around us where people on the outside looking in are like, what is up with college basketball, people? I think the wide spectrum of quality and levels in the sport is definitely a big factor of it. LIU, Brooklyn, FDU, and St. Peter's that are playing in high school gyms at best, even smaller than high school gyms sometimes, playing on technically the same level as a team like Kentucky who plays at Rupp Arena, or Carolina in the Dean Dome that are playing in arenas that are bigger than NBA stadiums. And these teams also get treated like NBA teams. And we know how important those David and Goliath matchups are to the sport and like what college basketball is, especially in March. So that having all those teams on the same level is kind of what makes that. I'd say the scheduling is a big part. People compare college basketball to college football because they're the two most premier college sports, and college football is a stretched out schedule. They try to make the season last, and people get kind of tired of it at some point. They also only play on the weekends and once a week, where college basketball, you're fitting in 30 games from November to the end of February, and you're playing games on Monday and Tuesday, and there's games every single night. Then I'd say just the unpredictability. Basketball in general is more volatile, I say, in terms of results compared to a lot of other sports. And there's also 364 teams, so it's impossible to really keep track of every single player and storyline and team and everything happening. So when a player breaks out or a crazy upset happens that we didn't expect, it's because we didn't know enough about whatever the topic is, whatever is happening. So the unpredictability and crazy outcomes, I think, is a huge, huge part of it. Or some other creators you'd recommend for keeping up with college basketball? There are a good amount out there. Most people would probably go towards your traditional media, which is fine by me, and I think everyone offers some value. There are a lot of really good people in the community. I definitely shout out JBR and T3 Bracketology on Twitter because those guys are doing God's work over there. Like the amount of effort they put into their bracketology, their research, their bubble information, their tournament outlook and stuff like that is way beyond even me. And I will 100% admit that. I love them. They're super nice people. I've talked to them. Definitely recommend those two. I'm so analytical and like deep, hard driven, and like I want to learn things and figure things out. I think there's value to laid back enjoyment also. I know Cole Adams, my guy on Twitter, also has done a really good job of that. And I think the Sleepers Media guys, Greg and Cart, do a really good job of that also. They analyze the sport. They do a lot of Big Ten ball also. They talk about it afterwards and before games and stuff like that also, but they have a very conversational, like fun, enjoyable, laid back aspect to it. Kind of reminds me of the I Own College Basketball podcast, the Norlander and Parrish podcast. The Sleepers guys are very much up that alley. Just, I guess, younger and a little generational and change or difference, I guess. Started watching this weekend. What non-top 25 games should I watch this week? I love this. I'm going to start doing this at the end of every YouTube video of like some kind of schedule outlook for the week. Picked out 6 under the radar, non-power conference, non-top 25 games to watch. VCU at St. Louis and Dayton at St. Louis in the A10. SLU's got a big week this week. VCU and Dayton are probably still the 2 best teams in the A10. VCU definitely is right now, at least. But those are 3 of the best A10 teams. I'd definitely watch those 2. I'd watch Oregon State at Gonzaga. Gonzaga lost at Oregon State a few weeks ago, so that's going to be a good one. I'd also watch Gonzaga at St. Mary's. That's one of the better rivalries in the sport, to be completely honest. And both of them could actually really use the win, and it's going to be a great game Saturday night. Yale versus Princeton, 2 of the best teams in the Ivy. That's on Friday at like 5 or 6 o'clock Eastern time. So it's an earlier game on a Friday. I think that's actually pretty damn awesome. It's on national television. Definitely watch that. I'd watch New Mexico and Utah State on the weekend. Those are the 2 best teams in the Mountain West right now. I think New Mexico has an edge to win this game, even in Logan, Utah, which actually might be kind of stupid now that I say that because they just find a way to win at home and really in general, but definitely at the Spectrum Center all the time. But those 6 games I would definitely watch. Those should be some of the best, if not the best, non-top 25 matchups this week. Appreciate y'all for watching as always, especially if you got to the end. I say this every week. If you watch all the way to the end and you're listening to this and watching this right now, I genuinely do appreciate you a lot. You're obviously subscribed, but if you're not, hit the subscribe button, put notifications on and likes and stuff like that. Growth and community I've been seeing on YouTube have meant a lot to me. Honestly, I'm in the very early stages, but I can see this being the long-term outlook for me and a lot of my content, and I know you guys enjoy it. So again, thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting. See ya.